On the 8th of February, Canon releases the much rumored and much expected Canon R8. Is the R8 a replacement for the Canon EOS R, or is it a replacement for the RP? Or is it actually just an R6 Mark II on a budget? Who is it for and what does it do? Let's talk about it. Hi guys, I hope you're having a great day. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. My name is Julian Scorani. I make reviews, tutorials, travel videos as well as vlogs. So if you're into that kind of stuff, consider subscribing. The first thing I wanted to talk about in the Canon EOS R8 is the physical aspect and the ergonomics of this camera. In one sentence, I would describe the R8's body as the Canon RP, with the layout of the switches and dials taken from the R6 Mark II. I say that because it has almost the identical dimensions as the Canon RP, which I personally didn't find very comfortable in the hand, at least not as comfortable as the Canon EOS R. The R8 also uses the exact same battery as the Canon RP, which is the LPE17 battery, but even though that battery is rated at 250 shots on the RP, at least on the R8 it is rated at 370 shots. Just like the RP, the R8 also only gets one UHS 2 SD card slot, which is also located next to the battery, and it is accessed from the same port. And at the same time, the R8 gets no joystick at the back as well as no wheel. Also, the viewfinder of the R8 is exactly the same as that of the RP, but the screen, even though the same size, it has 1.62 million dots instead of 1.004 million dots on the RP. From the R6 Mark II, the R8 has the same photo to video switch on the left side, and the on and off switch has also moved to the right. You also get a mode dial instead of the screen, but that's the same in the RP as well as the R6 Mark II. And also, like the R6 Mark II, you get the 21-pin multifunction hot shoe on the R8. The really big news about the Canon R8 is that it gets the same full-frame 24.2 megapixel sensor as the R6 Mark II. And that is a key difference between the R8 and the RP, because when the RP came out, it had a really budgety sensor carried over from the 6D Mark II, which was very compromised when it comes to dynamic range. But now, thanks to this sensor, you can expect really good photo and video quality from the R8. The Canon R8 also gets the same Digic X processor as the R6 Mark II, which means that you can expect really good autofocus from this camera. In fact, the autofocus has been programmed using machine learning algorithms, which lets it track moving subjects. It has eye, face, head and body detect autofocus for humans. It also gets eye autofocus for animals, as well as autofocus for vehicles and aircrafts. It also has the same subject-only autofocus like the R6 Mark II, in which case, if the subject leaves the frame, then the camera doesn't rush to focus on the background, but stays there and wait for the subject to reappear in frame. So where does it lack compared to the R6 Mark II then? Well, first of all, the R6 Mark II is bigger and has better ergonomics. It's also built more solid for professional use, while the R8 is a bit on the budget side. The R6 Mark II has a better resolution viewfinder, as you would expect. Also, one of the biggest features is that the R6 Mark II gets in-body image stabilization, whereas the R8 doesn't get that. Another key feature that you get on the R6 Mark II but you don't get on the R8 is dual SD card slots. That is a very important feature when you're recording or shooting very important events, just like weddings, which only happen once, and you want to make sure that you have backup if one of the cards fails. In that case, the R6 Mark II is better fit. The R6 Mark II also gets better battery life because it uses the LPE6N battery and it is rated at 760 shots. And one last key feature that you get with the R6 Mark II but you don't get with the R8 is the option to record 6K RAW footage externally. The Canon R8 uses a different kind of shutter, which is called Electronic first curtain shutter, and it works in a way that it's not fully manual, because in a manual shutter you have two curtains, one that starts the exposure for the sensor and the other one that closes it. On the R8 you don't get that. You don't get the first curtain because the sensor initiates the exposure electronically, but then you get the manual curtain, the second curtain that closes, and then that ends the exposure. Now, having talked about the mechanical shutter on the R8, let's come to the continuous shooting mode. While the R6 Mark II can shoot 12 frames per second with a mechanical shutter, the R8 can only shoot at 6 frames per second, which is quite a downgrade. But at least the good news is that with those 6 frames per second you can continuously shoot for over 1000 JPEGs or over 1000 RAW images. But if you want faster frame rates, then you can go to the electronic shutter, and with that you can shoot up to 40 frames per second. Keep in mind though that with the 40 frames per second you will only be able to shoot 120 JPEGs and 56 RAW images. You can also enable pre-shooting mode on the R8, in which if you press the shutter halfway and then eventually at some point all the way, the camera will keep the images taken half a second before the full press of the shutter button, and then continue like that with 30 frames per second in RAW images for 158 RAWs. But also keep in mind that you might get some rolling shutter artifacts when using the electronic shutter and capture fast moving subjects. When it comes to video, the R8 gets pretty much the same specs as the R6 Mark II, with the exception of 6K RAW external recording option. For example, you can shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second with no crop at all and oversample from 6K. You can also shoot in 1080p up to 180 frames per second with no crop, of course. All the videos, just like in the R6 Mark II, are encoded using the IPB or the IPB light compression. Another big thing about the R8 is that you can shoot on C-Log 3, which is Canon's second best C-Log. For those of you who don't know, the best C-Log is the C-Log 2, and that is only available on cinema cameras. And then comes the C-Log 3, and the worst that gives you least dynamic range is the C-Log. And also, to help you expose the footage correctly, you get false color with the R8, just like you get it with the R6 Mark II. Now that we went through pretty much all the important specifications on the Canon R8, let's come to some conclusions. Is the R8 a replacement for the Canon RP, or is it a replacement for the Canon EOS R? Or is it just a R6 Mark II on a budget? Well, in my opinion, I would say that it's not really a replacement for the Canon EOS R, because when that camera came out, it was the first full-frame mirrorless camera from Canon, and it was meant to be a fully professional camera. When the RP came out, it was meant like a budget full-frame mirrorless camera, just like the R8 is meant to be right now. The EOS R also was a camera that brought a lot of innovation in the mirrorless direction for Canon, whereas the RP and also the R8 now are only using existing technology but made more affordable. And that makes the Canon R8, in my opinion, the perfect camera for travelers as well as for content creators who want to enter Canon's full-frame mirrorless world but don't want to deal with any of the crippling that happened with the Canon RP. And that wraps this video up. Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked the video, consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, then consider subscribing. Peace.